Russia. Failures on the battlefield in Ukraine don't stop Moscow from flaunting its military might, as we've been talking about the annual Victory Day parade. The parade commemorates the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany, and it just wrapped up in Moscow's Red Square. The celebration is taking on a new meaning this year as Vladimir Putin frames his invasion of Ukraine as a means to defeat a new wave of Nazism. And we'll put that in quotes. The New York Times described the event as a claim of rightful dominance over a lost empire, a day to galvanize public support for the war by slandering Ukraine as a successor to Nazi Germany. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky joined Western Europe yesterday to mark Victory in Europe Day. He also marked Victory Day today, saying in part, very soon there will be 2 Victory Days in Ukraine, and someone won't have any. We won then, and we will win now. NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons is in Moscow this morning. We should note Russia is cracking down on journalists there, limiting what reporters can say under the threat of imprisonment. He filed this report.
Good morning. It was a defiant speech from President Putin here in Red Square. He railed against the West, accused NATO of funneling modern military equipment into Ukraine. He did also say the loss of each soldier is a tragedy for all of us, and we will do everything to help the families. But one military unit marching by here in Red Square chanted for Donbass. President Putin saying one of the units here had come straight from the fighting in Donbass. Every one of those marching will have colleagues in Ukraine here. This is Victory Day, a patriotic day across Russia and here in Red Square. One man telling us here that he is certain that Russia will be victorious in Ukraine. A woman saying, just like in 1945 we won, we will win again. Back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Keir. Richard Haass, fascinating. What you take from what we didn't hear today? Also, the Times report last week that Putin is holding back on some of his more deadly, more destructive tools that he could be using right now. I'm wondering whether you may believe that Putin is a bit more rational than we first expected, or that, everybody's saying he was irrational. And whether he just finds himself a man who thought he was going to get away with something that the West finally, after 20 years, decided to stop.
Well, 2 things, Joe. First, I thought today's speech was dispirited. It was almost as if he mailed it in. It was short, nothing new, it was flat. He had nothing new there. And once again, he repeated the line basically of Russia as victim. This was something they had to do. It was almost once again to absolve himself of responsibility. This was in fact, a war of choice. What I took from it on the policy side is essentially he's now simply hunkering down for a long slog. That this next phase of the war is going to involve the massing a large number of troops. There's not going to be a single decisive battle this week or next week. But this is this is the new normal. And so he wasn't promising anything new, no new expectations, just essentially getting ready for this long, long battle, this siege, if you will, to come. But essentially the tank was empty there.
Hey, Richard, how does he do that? I mean, first of all, we hear that they may be running very short on guided munitions, that obviously the economic sanctions, while not crippling them now, certainly puts them in a position they don't want to be in. They obviously have their closest ally, China, who will likely grow more impatient over time. How does he drag this war out into a war of attrition over a year or two with all the economic sanctions and political sanctions attached?
Look, he's got to be a little bit disappointed, Joe, with China's help or lack of it. The Chinese are clearly being careful so they don't get caught up in the web of sanctions. He's still got time on the sanctions that exist, the energy sanctions that are just been announced will take a while to kick in. They still don't affect gas. He's still going to be getting hundreds and hundreds of $1 million a day. But I think this question of how long they can sustain an intense military encounter is a legitimate question. So one possibility is it's not that intense, that this simply becomes a long siege. For Putin right now, it's the reason he won't sign a peace agreement. He has to avoid anything that punctuate his losing. He doesn't have to win. He just has to not lose. And losing would mean two things: a massive military rout, or an agreement he feels compelled to sign that would essentially acknowledge that he hasn't won. So my guess is he's almost reversed things, almost like the guerrilla. In the guerrilla war, he is going to try to win by not losing. This just suggests to me a long, low-keyed strategy.
Yeah, to Richard's point, this becomes sort of this endless fighting on the outskirts of Ukraine, where it just sort of continues for months and months and months.
Well, it does, but Richard, we're talking about an off-ramp. Here we are in May, and still trying to figure out. I mean, you asked the great question a couple weeks ago. What do we want out of this war? We're getting what we want out of this war. We're going to have Finland most likely in NATO. That was unthinkable 2 months ago. We're going to have Sweden in NATO. Unthinkable 2 months ago. Germany's going to have a larger defense budget than Russia. Unthinkable 2 months ago. Yeah, NATO more united than it's been probably any time since the early 1960s. Unthinkable a few months ago. The Russian military exposed as a third-rate army. Just a generational defeat. This is a generational defeat for Russia. Unthinkable a few months ago. So that's what the West, and by the way, the West, yes, the West that we've heard is in decline since I was in 6th grade, and my teacher was telling me how weak the West was and we were collapsing and in decline. It ends up that the West actually is far from in decline. The West is stronger than ever, regardless of what the haters on the far right and the far left say. Western democracy is stronger than ever. And now let's go to Putin. What is it? How? And again, this is something we have to figure out. This is the challenge that we have to face in the coming months. How do we help Vladimir Putin get out of this corner he has placed himself in, because he is not going to walk away from power. And we are not going to engage in regime change in Russia. And yet he has put himself in such a miserable position. Everything that Madeleine Albright said would happen before this war has now happened. Everything that you said would happen before the war has now happened. So how does this war end in a way that doesn't have Vladimir Putin in the corner going, well, I've got nothing to lose. I might as well resort to chemical weapons or nuclear weapons?
Well, I don't think he gets there if we simply have an indecisive stalemate. And again, I think he can live with not winning. What he just can't live with is losing. And again, he'd lose either with a rout, and the danger of the rout, as you and I have talked about, is that could get him to think about escalating, or he would lose if you have a formal peace agreement, the equivalent of the battleship Missouri in this case, that would show once and for all, for example, that he had to accept an independent, sovereign Ukraine that, among other things, could join the EU, and that he wouldn't control certain chunks of real estate. I just don't think he can or will do that. So if you have a losing hand, you don't want to walk away from the table. That punctuates it. You just keep the game going. So my guess is Putin now is going to play for time, a low-keyed, open-ended military struggle. So there's no one who can say you lost. And he can say, I didn't lose. This is still ongoing. We are going to prevail. He at least has the talking point. And that's how I took this morning. He wasn't promising any near-term victories. This was just sort of now a low-keyed, open-ended armed struggle. And I think this could become, again, the phrase, Joe, is a frozen conflict. This could become a low-level frozen conflict with flare-ups every now and then. And I think this is going to become the new normal there.